Hello, everybody. Welcome to another lesson from the Lines podcast. I am Lieutenant Colonel J. Arnold Clammett, retired Air Force, retired 33 years from the Air Force and 28 years Civil Service DOD. This week's episode, we are interviewing a good friend of mine who is a pastor. And I told you in the beginning that we were going to be doing interviews with pastors and first responders and military members. So this is going to be our first episode of interviewing a pastor. And so, Mr. Larry, if you could introduce yourself to our crowd and give a little background of what you do and where you live, that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you so much, Arnold. Thank you for all that you and Elizabeth do for the kingdom. You guys are amazing. And we're so thankful that we were able to meet you guys through our publisher, become friends with you. I thank you for your service to our country. You are an inspiration to a lot of people. And so thank you for the privilege of being here. My name is Larry Ragland. My wife, Sandy, and I started our church here in the Birmingham, Alabama area back in 1994. So this October will be 29 years since we started the church. We've been in ministry now for over 32 years and pastoring the same church for 29 years. And we're in our fifth building. God has blessed us. We also lead a network of churches called Ambassadors Network, where we pastor pastors. Where one of the things that we always say is every pastor needs a pastor. Everybody needs a covering. And so my passion in my life, I'm a pawpaw now, living that pawpaw life, and ain't nothing like it. I got two granddaughters.
Nope, nothing like it.
Nothing like it. Now, I know every time me and you get together, that's all we talk about is our grandkids,
because
there's nothing like it. But, in this phase of my life, I was really ready to not retire by no means, but I was thinking, we'd built a house during the pandemic, which was crazy, but we did. And I thought, I got my first grandbaby at that time. I'm just going to sort of slow down, pastor the church, drink coffee on the back porch, watch the sun go down, enjoy my grandbaby. And God just sort of shook me up and said, no, you're a soldier in the army of the Lord. And if there's ever been a time that you need to be a voice, it's now. So he put me on YouTube. We have a show now called The Big Picture. And, I've wrote, my book is just coming out and all this. So really, quite frankly, in my mid-50s now, I'm busier than I've ever been in my life. And I'm loving it because that's what I've been called to do. But I'm loving it because that's my passion, to encourage and equip and raise up people. So I guess that's the synopsis of what's going on in this pawpaw life right now.
There you go. Nothing better being a pawpaw.
Yes.
Just a selfish plug here. Here's a book he's talking about.
Oh,
I See Greatness in You, and I highly recommend this book. It is an awesome read and a great lead into what Pastor Larry does and where he comes from and his background. And it is a very insightful read, and I'm getting ready to read it a second time because I buzzed through it so fast the first time I missed a bunch of stuff. So I got to go back and reread. Awesome book, my friend.
I thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Well, let's dive in and get into our questions. And so far during your time as a soldier for the Lord, what has been your biggest takeaway?
Oh, great question. I would say biggest takeaway for me would be, like I said, I've been doing this now for 30 something years, and very quickly you find out when you're called to the ministry and called to, especially if you're not just called to, and I hate to say it this way because I don't want to offend anybody, but a lot of people sort of go into it with a career mind. I've never thought that way. It's not a career. It's a calling. It's a charge from God. And if you're really called by God and you really are accepting and saying yes to the actual call to preach the gospel, one of the first takeaways, and I think the greatest takeaway of the ministry, is it is absolutely not about you. It's when you got so many preachers and so many quote unquote inspirational leaders and all this that have made it about them. It's about how many Instagram followers you got, how many viewers you got on YouTube, and all this kind of stuff. And that's just not the kingdom. The kingdom is God calls you to impact others. He doesn't call you to make you famous. And so early on, we had, most of our ministry has been, quite frankly, a struggle, financial struggle, a resource struggle. so many times I wanted to quit and give up. I wrote my resignation letter several times over the years because the ministry is a tough life. It's
Right,
because it's 24/7, 365 days a year, and your ministry, the ministry is in front of you. But one of the things is you might get the revelation that it's not about you, that it's about people. But if you're not careful, you'll forget the people that's right in front of you. Your own family
right,
will be hurt and affected by that. So my greatest takeaway would be that if you're going to say yes to God in on any level, then you need to understand that He's calling you and He will bless you, but He's calling you to always focus on others.
right, right. And being in the military, a lot of that is correlates with what we do as military members as well. Is we feel it's a calling. We don't go into it looking to make it a career, and I was
Yep.
just fortunate enough that it did turn into a career for me, and I was able to provide for the family, but I was able to help make sure this country stayed safe. And
Amen.
I felt that that was a calling from God, and that venue is done. And now He's called me into something else, and we're headed down that road now, trying to figure out what it is. But doing these
Yeah,
podcasts, I think, is exactly what He's got us in line to do, and makes it easy for us to do His calling.
absolutely. Yes, sir.
So rolling it, you mentioned there in front of you your family. So that kind of led me into the next question here is during your time on the line, what is your biggest regret?
That's uh that's very easy to answer in words, but difficult to answer in principle because I get very emotional about
Yep.
that, and that is that the word regret is a big word, and I've said that many times before. I've said, you know, the one thing I regret is the fact that I did go all in with God, and I did make it all about serving Him and getting as many people into the kingdom as possible. But you can't do anything about the past. But when I look back over my both of my daughters' childhood, they were both born into the ministry. They were raised in the ministry. Went through 5 building programs. 4 of those buildings, they were in school. One of them we worked for 14 months, 6 days a week, restoring an old abandoned building to turn into a church before we could move in and volunteer work. We basically lived there. My kids slept in the altars on an air mattress. Uh, they homeschooled all this and then went to public school and then just really didn't have a life. And when you get so caught up in service to others, many, many times I've seen in the ministry, I'm sure it's the same way in the military and other things in life, the mission, the mission, the mission. It's always about the mission and orders and mission, the mission and orders. And a lot of times we are so all in on the mission and the orders
Yep.
that we forget about the homeland. We forget about those that are still at home taking care of the homestead and taking care of you know what we want to be a part of, and we just take for granted that it's done. And so that caused a lot of issues with my kids, especially one of my children, and both my kids are amazing. But it just sort of gave them a bad taste of church because they had been
Right.
hurt so many times. They'd watched their mom and dad be hurt and by people that you invest your life into, you pour into their life, and then on a dime, it's just like they just walk away, turn on you, try to say bad things and all that. And they saw us crying, they saw us, battling depression and all of this. So, but the regret, to answer the question, the regret was not allowing myself to have the ability to come back down and zoom back down to what was most important. And boy, I tell you what, you can't do anything about the past. But if there's anything I would change about the past, it would be that I would really make sure that I did not get so caught up in the mission and the orders that I forgot those that were right in front of me, because that was my first mission. That was supposed to be
Right.
my priority mission. And
Right.
but I've worked through that, and my kids and myself have a great relationship, and we've talked about it. I've let them be very transparent with me, but that's one of the reasons that God put it on my heart to start Ambassadors Network several years ago, because a pastor needs a pastor, and not just someone
Right.
to talk to about ministry, but they need somebody to keep that say, hey son, listen, you need to, don't forget your wife, don't forget your kids, don't forget your grandkids, don't forget the home life. Because um, if I can, I'll tell you one quick story. There's a very famous evangelist. I don't know if you ever heard of him or not. His name was Billy Sunday. And Billy Sunday was very well known. This was way back in the turn of the century. He was huge in popularity, and he was a former baseball player, professional baseball player in the early days of the Major League Baseball. So he was very well known. Billy Sunday was, and he would do tent revivals. And he was famous for running into the tent, and they had sawdust back in those days, in the tent revivals, and have a little piece of plywood up there where his little stage would be. And he'd run in there and slide on the sawdust like he's sliding into second base, and just stand up right at the pulpit. And he was just very energetic, very famous. And some people have even said that, back in that day, before there was satellite television, before all this, that around the world he was credited with leading close to 1 million people to Christ before he
Wow.
died. And but on his deathbed, this is what I've read, and it just breaks my heart every time I tell the story. This is a long answer to your question, but he is dying, and they're telling him, his family's around him, and doctors are there, and they're like, Billy, you have reached the world, and we have somebody here recording your final words. And he said, well, write this down. Uh, all of it was wonderful. All of it was great. But if I could go back and change it all, I would change every bit, because maybe I won 1 million people to Christ, but my 2 sons don't even know Jesus, and they refuse to accept Jesus.
Mm.
And he said, I love the Lord. I can't wait to see him, but I feel like a complete failure. Well, and that was one of his last words. He said, well, you and I both know, he was not a failure. He was tremendously used by God. But when it gets right down to it, you will say
Family's
to
priority.
yourself, family is priority. So I
Yep.
say to anyone that's listening to this, most people that are listening to this are people that's been on the line in active combat, peacetime service, whatever it is. You've been serving this country. You've been taking your orders. You're trained about the mission. Nothing needs to change on that, because that's who you are. That's what you're made to do. But I want to encourage you, if you're in the military, or if you're in the army of the Lord, a ministry, just a man or woman of God, just a human being listening to this podcast, keep the main thing the main thing.
Right. That is so true. And there are so many people um, in the military, and even first responders, that are so geared up on the mission that when the mission's done and the proverbial word of retirement hits them, they don't know what to do.
Yep.
And in 6 months to a year after retiring, they're gone, because
Wow.
they have no life, and they have no, and that's not even counting the ones who are committing suicide because of whatever they dealt with overseas, or the horrors that they've dealt with, and PTSD just gets too much to them. And they state 22 veterans a day are committing suicide because they lose focus on what the priority is, and they can't cope anymore because it was so ingrained in them for the mission and the service, that they don't know how to deal with the civilian world. And I know in the pastoral world, I've never been one, but I've had many pastors, and still friends with many pastors around the country. But I see the turmoil and the conflict that you guys go through, because of everything that you do is geared toward the church and your flock and your people, that your family becomes second fiddle. And it was the same way for me. I preached everything to everybody about family's priority, and my family was priority to me when I wasn't on the mission or I wasn't at work. And it was
Yeah.
like weekends were family, but Monday through Friday and the reserve weekend every once a month was all about the mission.
Yeah.
And that's one of my biggest regrets, is that I didn't make my family more of a priority than what I did. So
Yeah.
it's tough. Excuse me. So now you've kind of alluded to what I'm coming to in this next question, but knowing what you know now, and I think you may have answered it a little bit in your last question. What would you tell your younger self coming into this?
Oh man. Well, I lead with what I left off in the last question. You'll keep the main thing, uh, which is simple but yet profound. But to myself, I would say learn the word priority and what it really means. And I'll
Hmm,
say this: I want to make it very, very clear for those that think they fully know what I'm saying. I want to make sure that you do know what I'm saying. When you are called to the ministry, or when you are called to serve your country in any branch of military, first responders, when you accept that call, because I really believe, and I know you do, it's a calling. It's not
hmm.
just it's not just a job. It may be a job to some people. They may be second or third generation of something, but you know we're talking about you put your life on the line for other people, and Jesus made it very clear. There's no greater love than that, than a man
Right,
to choose to lay down his life for his friend. That doesn't mean you're going to walk out and allow yourself to be killed, but you take an occupation that you understand your life could be on the line. Thankfully, most people live their whole career and they don't have to give their life for that. But when you know that there is a possibility of that, there's no greater service in life than that. There's no greater
right.
calling in life than that. And Jesus made that very clear. Uh, so, that being said, when you accept a call to ministry, when you accept a call to serve your country or put yourself in harm's way, you also understand. And the question was, what would I say to my younger self? Well, this is how I would answer that. You understand that you have accepted a call that, fair or not fair, you're not going to get the life that most normal people get. You're not going to get to live
So true.
like, am I right?
You
So
are so true.
it's like you understand that, fair or not fair, you're going to look at the world and you're going to say, man, that must be nice. That must be nice to live a life, have a life like that where you ain't got to worry about this, and this. Well, the thing is, we're not saying that they're not important to God, but the truth is they've not accepted the call that you've accepted. And
Right.
so when I went into the ministry, I didn't have any ministry friends. You're a young man. I mean, I got married in May of 1989. You've read my book, so you know my story. Me and my wife, this little schoolgirl, right out of high school, agreed to marry me, and we had never had a single discussion. There was never a moment ever said that we would ever desire to be in ministry. It was nowhere on the radar when we got married. We were going to serve God. I was going to work a job. She was going to work. We was going to have kids, and we was going to have the American dream, and we was just going to go to church and serve in church. We got married in May 1989. Well, by August of that same year, 1989, God began to speak to me in my dreams and began to call me and telling me he was calling me to preach the gospel. Started seeing myself with a microphone in my hand preaching the gospel. I was like, what in the world? This is a nightmare. This is not a dream. I do not want this. And but when I finally said yes, that's been our life ever since. If I could go back and talk to that young man, that kid, really still, I would just say, Larry, listen, man, you got to understand, the life that you have ahead of you is going to be full of tragedies. It's going to be full of things that are going to just devastate you. You're going to lose a lot. You're going to be successful as well. You're going to see mountains. You're going to see valleys. But the quicker you understand that you are a remnant and therefore you have been chosen and pulled out by God, and that you need to learn how to accept the fact your life is not like others. It is a calling. And so just sort of enjoy the ride, because I'll be honest with you, Arnold, that's another regret of mine, is I didn't allow myself to enjoy the journey, because it's been a difficult journey, just like for you. There's just been so much. You've seen so much. You've gone through so much. And, one of the things you hear a lot when it comes to former military, current military, retired military, like you alluded to earlier, is the two things. One, PTSD is very real. They're just so involved in so many things, take them back to that pain. But their identity, they don't realize it, but their entire identity gets wrapped up in that piece, that suit of armor, that gun, that training, and that's your life, that's your compass. And when that's taken away from you, like I said, you're put back into regular life. You don't know what to do with it, because your whole identity has been wrapped up in the mission. And at some point, we all have to learn our identity is not what we do, it's who we are. And
Right.
so that's where I sort of wish I could go back and tell that young Larry, is that, you've seen preachers, you've read books, you've watched Christian TV and all this, and you had this idea of this is what the ministry is. And I ran after that because that's all I knew. But I
Right.
found out real quick that there's no glamour. There's no glamour in the ministry. It's
And
work.
it's much more than what you ever imagined too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, Dr. John Maxwell, great author on leadership books, he said, you can define leadership with 3 words: work, work, and more work, period.
True. If you're not being a leader, no matter what career you're in, work and learning, work and education, and work and leading people, and then you've got your own work that you've got to do to improve yourself.
Yeah.
So I'd
Yeah.
add a fourth
Absolutely.
word to it, is work. So
Yeah.
so with all of this being said, if you were to think about it for a minute, what would be your greatest achievement so far in your life and your ministry?
Well, my greatest achievement is my children. And I would say, I would really, at this point, I'm careful because, you never know who's going to listen to this podcast. I want my youngest daughter to know that if somehow she makes it to this podcast, or someone that she knows listens to this podcast and identifies me as her father, how proud I am of her, even though she's on her journey of trying to find God and to come back to the church because she was hurt so badly in so many
Mm-hmm.
ways. I want her to know how proud I am of her. And I say that to preface this next statement, to answer my greatest achievement. It's one of them. And that is, I don't know if I could say greatest achievement, but my oldest daughter and her husband are very active in the ministry, and they have raised raised one of my grandbabies, who's 4 now, and the other one that's brand new, that's 4 months old at the time of this recording, to fear the Lord, to serve the Lord every day. They live with us right now while they're building the house, and every day I hear her teaching them the Bible, teaching her the Bible, teaching her stories and worship songs. So, God's blessing our YouTube channel. God's blessing our Christian television show. He's blessing our book. There's just so many things he has his hand on. But, none of it, Arnold, none of it compares to, like, this morning as I was headed to the church to get ready for this show. Just walking through the living room and seeing my 4-year-old grandbaby dancing to a song about the Bible, and just talking about the Bible. And I just, it's all about perspective. And
Yep.
So, I'm thankful for what the Lord is doing in my life, and I'd love to see millions of people's souls saved through our ministry. But truly, at this point in my life, my greatest achievement is to know that my kids love us, my kids want to be with us, and that they love the Lord, and that wherever God takes us next, I'm ready. I'm all in. I'm fired up. I'm ready to what God is doing. But man, I'm content. If the Lord took me right now and I went on to be with the Lord, I've lived a great life. I've just God has really had His hand on me, and so yeah, whatever comes next is just icing on the cake, man. I'm thankful for what God has already done, and I guess that's maybe that's not a true answer to the question, but I love my church. By the way, I want my church to know I'm so proud of my church. I am proud, and I shudder to call it an achievement because it's not mine. It's God's. It's His house.
Right.
But we have come from nothing. Started in October 1994 with 10 people, and that was including my family, and to go through 5 buildings 29 years later, sit in the facility in the beautiful move of God that we're seeing. We're in bona fide revival right now. So I'm thankful. That's a great achievement that God has done. But I know that God has anointed me to work hard in that, to stay focused. And I truly believe for you guys and what God is doing in your ministry, in person, through your books, through your podcasts, through your YouTube channel, through your speaking engagements, in your mobile studio around the world. God has just begun for all of us. I mean, I say this all the time, Arnold, is this: God has no plan B. It's us. We are the
Yeah.
plan A. And it's like, we were born into the kingdom for such a time as this. And I'm going to tell you, this is a time to be born. And you can either be afraid, scared to death of what is happening and what is coming, or you can say, put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. And you must have saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Because I think about all the generals. You're talking about Billy Sunday earlier. You talk about Oral Roberts. You talk about Billy Graham. You could go on and on and on of these great men and women of God that are gone, and they're not here. And this is what I believe to be the final generation, the final move of God. And He chose us. He chose us to be in this battle. He chose us to put on the armor of God. He chose us to say, He said to us, I trust you to be the final generation to rise up against this attack of the enemy. And so that's why I say I'm all in. I'm all in. I know you're all in. Appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate it's been so easy for you, brother, to just cruise, man. You've served your country. You're living a life where you're traveling around with your wife and things are happening. But no, I was sitting at that table with you in one of those conferences when I saw the light bulbs going off inside of you, that it's time. I've got to stretch myself. I've got to get out of my comfort zone. And I choose not to just sleep my way to the end. I got work to do. My job has just begun. So I'm proud of you, Arnold. I admire you, and I thank God for what God is doing in your life.
Well, I appreciate that. I know I've read the Bible. Most people say frontwards, backwards, inside and out. And every time I pick up the Bible, I have yet to find the word retirement in it. So it's just time for me to take on a new challenge and do what God's called me to do, since my last service is done, and you're continuing your service. So our final question for today for the group is, if you could title your story, what would it be? And I think you've already written your first part of your story here.
Yeah.
But I See Greatness in You is, like I said earlier in the podcast, is an awesome book. But that was a story that God gave you to write on your story, on your life. Would you change it from what you've already written if you were to do a story on your life, or would you leave it as is?
Well, I would leave that part as is, because those 5 words mean so much, as you know, reading the book,
Mm-hmm.
of how they changed my life. And And I want to say to those that hear the title, this is not a self-help book. This is not 5 steps to help you live your great life. That is not what that means. That you have to read the book to understand. This is a story of complete just being dropped and being restored and by God. And the greatness that's in that title is the greatness of God. I see the greatness of God in you. But it's called that but for a very specific reason of something happened in my life. But, shameless plug, if you will. If you're watching this, you maybe listen to it on podcast. If you're watching this, right above my head is the words, The Big Picture. And that's the name of our YouTube show. That's the name of our television show. And quite frankly, that is really the name that I would say sums up my life now. If I could sum it up, I would say you must be big picture. And when God spoke to me, we've heard those terms your whole life, the big picture, the picture. You guys got to see the big picture, guys. But when it dropped in me, the moment that it did, and there's a part in the book where I really talk about when that happened, it changed everything for my life. And that's why we call everything we do. And I those that know me in my life, they know every day they're going to hear me say something about the big picture, not about our show, just about the big picture perspective, because that is what I would say is that none of us really know the big picture. None of us can really see the end because that's beyond our perspective. We're not the Alpha and Omega. We're not the beginning and the end, but we serve the Alpha and Omega. And one of the things that I talk about in the book that is a perfect illustration of what I mean by my life and how I've chosen to live my life now. And I would write that book, which, by the way, I probably will write a book about the big picture. And I'm working a little bit on that, maybe even now, but is, there's no telling where you're going to watch or listen to this around the world. So everybody's landscape's different. If you're out there in Texas like you are, I actually write about Texas when I was taking a trip as a teenager, and it was in Texas at one of the road, the stops on the side of the road, the rest stops, that for the first time in my life, I had never seen land that flat. I had never seen ever. It just blew my mind. I'm from Alabama. And it's like, I couldn't believe that I looked out over the horizon there and I could see a train, the beginning and the end of that train. I can remember like it was yesterday. It was like I could see all the train, and I had never seen all of the train in my life because in Alabama, we're just full of hills and trees. So anytime you ever cross a train track, you never, ever, anywhere in Alabama, can you see the beginning and the end of a train. It's like you get stopped and you just have to wait. You just don't know when the last car's coming. You have no idea. You just have to wait. And so I talk about that in the book about how that just changed my perspective, that it's really that same train that I saw the front and the end at that rest stop in Texas is possibly could be the same train that came through Alabama. But when you are, the only reason I was able to see the beginning from the end was perspective. And so I realized that when I sit at a train crossing in Alabama, I have to trust that there is an end coming, even though I can't see it. But if I had the ability to just lift my car up, there would be at some point where I'd get higher and higher and higher, that I'd be able to look out the window of that car and I would be able to see the end. But I can't do that because that's not my permission realm, but that's God's perspective. God can see the end from the beginning. So the big picture changed everything because God sees the big picture in everything we're going through. No matter what we're going through, there is an end. We might not be able to see it, but we trust a God that can see it. Our job is not to find a way to see the end. Our job is to trust the God who can see the end and learn and grow in the wait for the end.
Right. That is so true. And while you were describing your picture there of the train and being able to see the beginning and the end there, it came to my mind that all of the peripheral surroundings were gone and you could see. And then if you go back to
Yep.
Alabama, like you're talking about, you're sitting at a crossing, you got nothing but trees and hills around you. All that world is crowded in around you. So you just have to
Yes,
patiently
sir.
wait. But if we can learn to adjust our peripheral vision to not focus on the stuff that's right around us and all the chaos that's right around us, and learn to seek that bigger picture, it will make life so much easier for us. And that's part of what Lessons from the Line is all about, is learning to expand your vision and your thought process, and to realize there's more to what you're doing in life. There's more to who you are in life than your mission, your immediate focus. There's so much more to what God has brought you into this world to do. And I totally appreciate your perspectives today, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate
Before
you
we
having
end
me
this
on.
podcast, is there anything else that you would like to any last words that you would like to give to our listeners?
Keep the main thing. And I'm telling you, focus on God. And if there's ever been a time that you need to be strong in your foundation and know who you are in God, it's now. Because, without trying to go down a big rabbit hole here, one of the things that God called me to go out on YouTube and be is a voice to tell people just really what is coming. This world is in bad shape now, but it pales in comparison to what's coming. There's some very difficult things are coming down the line for people all around the world. And it's going to be a tough time for a lot of people. And if you've ever known God, or if you've never known God, then I encourage you to turn your life over to God and surrender your heart to God, to Jesus, not to a concept of God, to Jesus. And when you repent and turn from your wicked ways, he'll heal your land, but he'll also heal your heart. But you need to have a strong foundation, because I'm telling you, if you don't know who you are in God, I say this all the time, we all know the most powerful force on this earth is the Holy Spirit. The second most powerful force on this earth is a man or a woman that knows who they are in God. And if you don't know who you are in God, you're not going to be able to make it in this time. But if you know who you are in God, no matter what the enemy brings, you'll be able to make it.
Awesome words of encouragement there. Well, folks, this is a wrap from Lessons from the Line. I am Lieutenant Colonel J. Arnold Clammond, and we have been talking with Larry Ragland out of Alabama today, Lord. And I just want to say we will see you again on the next episode. And as I always say, be blessed. Don't stress. God's got it. Love you guys. We'll see you next time.